is useful info. And another person says, what about local flyers for dog walking or kids looking after school jobs? So fair enough, there's a whole range. There's a whole ecosystem, perhaps, Joe, that relies on these flyers.
Absolutely, and there are people for whom that is a useful and sometimes essential part of the communication network that they
Very fair point.
work in.
You've been wonderful both. Alan McElroy, Joe McCarroll, thank you very much for coming, and stop peeling your veggies and eat kiwifruit whole. That's my advice to you, Alan.
Nope.
See you later.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, the Olympians in black caps can jump the queue for early access to the COVID jab as the government details new priority vaccine categories for people heading offshore. The COVID response minister is with us live. Immigration New Zealand says whole sectors of the construction industry are propped up by illegal exploited foreign labour. What can you buy in Auckland for $625,000? We'll give you a clue. It's one bedroom and it's 38 square metres. Some property investors are scrambling to buy houses before the new tax rules come into force. National takes aim at the Speaker again, and we're live from the red carpet as the Halbergs get underway.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with DNA. Olympians and the Black Caps are among those who can apply next week for early COVID-19 vaccinations to travel out of the country for reasons of national significance. The government has confirmed strict criteria for early vaccinations for people who need to travel overseas, which includes representing the country in an official capacity at international events. This has hit a raw nerve with those trying to get at-risk populations prioritised for the next national vaccine rollout. The Māori Party co-leader Rawari Waititi says he is appalled national sports teams could be immunised before Māori communities.
And this government should be ashamed of themselves if that's what they're prioritising in terms of our national sports team over the vulnerability of its Indigenous peoples. This country will be measured on that. I'm absolutely appalled that the Black Caps would be given priority over Māori in terms of vaccinations.
Meanwhile, people wanting to attend a funeral overseas will not qualify under the new compassionate criteria for early vaccination. The director of a major Auckland real estate firm says there could be a small drop in house prices, but he's not expecting dramatic changes. The government yesterday announced a raft of housing changes, including closing a tax loophole and increasing the length of time a house must be owned to avoid a tax on the capital gain when it's sold. The managing director of Barfoot and Thompson in Auckland, Peter Thompson, says it will probably be up to 6 months before the real impact of the changes is seen.
I think what we'll see is the number of properties that sell will slow down possibly, but I certainly don't see, house prices will level out. There may be a slight fall in price, but it wouldn't be as much as what everyone's predicting.
Peter Thompson says if prices are cooling, people are likely to hold off from putting properties up for sale. Westpac Bank has confirmed it is considering selling its New Zealand business. The parent bank is looking at options ranging from keeping it to a private sale to spinning it off to shareholders. The review has been triggered by the likely need to pump extra capital into the New Zealand business to meet new Reserve Bank rules. Westpac is the third biggest bank in New Zealand, making up about 20% of the market. Its full-year profit plunged more than 40% last year because of low interest rates and COVID-19. A code black has been declared at Dunedin Hospital after it reached full capacity. The Southern DHB says its emergency department is still open, but it's calling on those who are unwell to see their family doctor or the after-hours service and keep ED for real emergencies only. Early this morning, 18 patients in the emergency department were awaiting a bed, but only 3 beds were available on the wards. The minister responsible for the SIS has mounted a spirited defence of the agency after its annual appearance at Select Committee. The pressure has been on the Domestic Spy Agency and its head Rebecca Kitteridge after the Royal Commission report into the mosque attacks. She told MPs that counter-terrorism efforts are now split 50-50 between white identity extremism and faith-motivated extremism. Ms Kitteridge wouldn't say how much of a focus the SIS had on white identity extremism before the attacks, apart from it being less than now. Andrew Little says he has confidence in Rebecca Kitteridge.
She talked at length about the difficulty about how far she goes in talking about specifics, specific threats and the specific work that they're doing, because the last thing you want to do is tip off individuals and organisations who potentially pose a threat.
The spy agencies also say half of their staff have received unconscious bias training. The National Party says it's outrageous the Prime Minister is still backing the Speaker of the House. National MP Chris Bishop criticised Trevor Mallard during a speech in Parliament for his conduct over a man he wrongly accused of being a rapist. A statement of claim alleges a month later Trevor Mallard's lawyers wrote a letter saying if the man pursued the case, his reputation and conduct would be the centrepiece. Jacinda Ardern still backs the Speaker, saying nothing has materially changed since he apologised late last year. But Chris Bishop says Mr Mallard's position is no longer tenable.
This is a question of judgment for Jacinda Ardern as to whether or not she is prepared to stand by and let behaviour of this sort be tolerated.
Trevor Mallard made no response in the House except to say he looks forward to a Select Committee hearing where the truth will be revealed. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. Leading New Zealand athletes will be able to jump the COVID-19 vaccination queue so they can compete at international events, but will still have to undergo 2 weeks of quarantine on their return. The government has announced strict criteria for early vaccinations, with sports people among those eligible to apply. Those most immediately affected will be athletes heading to the Tokyo Olympics in July. The head of the New Zealand Olympic Committee, Karen Smith, says the Games organisers say it isn't mandatory for athletes to be vaccinated.
We feel that it's a very positive and important step in terms of keeping our athletes safe in an environment where they will be with 10,500 athletes from around 206 different countries. So we certainly feel for their own personal well-being and that of their own teammates, it would be very, very important step.
The Wellington Phoenix play bottom-of-the-table Melbourne Victory tonight in their A-League football match, hoping the return of former skipper Stephen Taylor can help them chalk up just their 4th win of the season. The match kicks off just after 9 o'clock. That's the news.
Hot debate on housing reforms.
We can't afford to have a housing bubble. That's good for no one. We had to act on that. They've had 4 years to get this done, and now they're turning around. And what's going to happen, Corin, is it's the renters who are going to end up paying for this.
Leaving first home buyers and investors locked out.
Will it work to make housing more affordable? No.
That was really heartbreaking. Every week the prices of houses in Wellington increase.
From both sides of the fence, Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. Cloud increasing this evening, drizzle developing tonight and overnight. For the remainder of the North Island, fine apart from areas of cloud morning and night. Isolated showers possible about central and northern areas. Nelson, Buller and inland Marlborough, fine apart from a few cloudy areas. Isolated showers about the ranges, some possibly heavy today. Coastal Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha. Cloudy, patchy drizzle clearing tomorrow morning, fine breaks developing tomorrow afternoon. For central Otago, Southern Lakes and Southland, fine breaks increasing. Fine tomorrow apart from patchy morning fog or cloud. Westland and Fiordland fine apart from cloudy periods morning and night with isolated showers for Fiordland. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and occasional drizzle. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen Takuingwa. Olympians in the Black Caps have been given the green light to apply for COVID-19 vaccinations from next week so they can head away for their events. The government's confirmed strict criteria for early vaccinations for people who need to travel overseas. Among those eligible are people providing critical care to a dependent, accessing critical care not available in New Zealand, and visiting an immediate family member who is dying. But some say when it comes to the rollout, the government has its priorities all wrong. Amy Williams filed this report.
For those needing to travel overseas for work, it all comes down to national significance. COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says national significance criteria includes representing the country in an official capacity at international events. Asked whether this includes the Black Caps, he had this to say.
Our expectation is that the Olympians would be eligible under the national interest criteria, and a national sports team participating in a significant event would also meet those criteria.
This has hit a raw nerve with those trying to get at-risk populations prioritised for the national vaccine rollout. Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi says he's appalled national sports teams could be immunised before Māori communities.
This country should be ashamed of themselves, and this government should be ashamed of themselves if that's what they're prioritising in terms of our national sports team over the vulnerability of its Indigenous peoples. This country will be measured on that, and so I'm absolutely appalled that the Black Caps would be given priority over Māori in terms of vaccinations.
But Associate Minister of Health, Pēni Henare, says Māori are already being vaccinated.
We're working with providers on that to lock in the kind of support and the contract that's required so that they can do that. And we're also looking to, as Minister of Defence, support those logistics right across the country.
The Ministry of Health has so far administered 41,500 doses of the vaccine in the national rollout. Health Minister Andrew Little says the vaccine rollout priorities are in a good place and the schedule is constantly being revised.
We've got to weigh all these things in the balance, and those who have an opportunity to travel overseas but who need a vaccination, providing they meet certain criteria, then we should consider that as well.
Do you think Māori will rightly feel let down by that decision?
No, because I think the sequencing criteria, as we've established it now, gives significant priority to Māori.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the criteria to receive an early vaccination before travelling overseas are strict.
We have set the bar very high here. We've said it has to be for international representation of national significance.
Meanwhile, people wanting to attend a funeral overseas will not qualify under the government's new compassionate criteria for early vaccination. The criteria includes providing critical care to a dependent, accessing critical care not available in New Zealand, and visiting an immediate family member who is dying. People who meet the criteria to receive an early vaccination before travelling can apply from next week. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
It's almost 11 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come on the programme, we'll speak to the COVID-19 Recovery Minister, Chris Hipkins. In an attempt to help Kiwis buy their first home, the government has eased restrictions on first home grants and loans. Both are subject to property value caps. In Auckland, that cap will increase from $600,000 to $625,000. Now, that's for an existing home. But with prices already well out of reach for many first home buyers, we wanted to know what you could actually get in Auckland for that $625,000. So we sent reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe out on a house hunting mission with Barfoot and Thompson real estate agent Rawdon Christie. Here's how they went.
G'day, Rawdon.
G'day, how are you?
Nice to see you.
Hey, nice of you to come in.
Hey, look, I've got $625K that I want to spend on a new home. Wondering if you can help me out. Can we go through a few options?
Yep, and you want to stay in Auckland?
I want to stay in Auckland.
Okay,
I want to stay in Auckland.
All right, let's have a look. Take a seat. Sure. I'll move some of my clutter. And we'll have a look through. So we'll have a look through the database because obviously it depends where you're looking within the city. And we could put in a price range. So I've put in Auckland City because we want to take out obviously all the Northland properties because there may well be a few more. And I've put in a price bracket of 500,000 to 600,000. And I'll put in townhouse, house, apartment. We won't worry about a unit. We won't worry about a section.
Right.
Because the last thing you want to do is have to build a house.
Absolutely. I've got 625. I need the house already.
That's your ceiling. Great. Okay. And then if we put those various criteria into the search engine and press search, how many properties does Barfoot's have on the market at the moment in Auckland City? 72.
Right. And I can see these are mostly, straight away, you can see these are mostly, they're units, aren't they?
A lot of units. So, as you can see, city centre, 2 2-bedroom in Broadway. That seems cheap for a new market for what they're looking at there. Or here we go down in the city again. Or you're going to go a wee bit further south. Maybe Onehunga for a 2-bedder, a Tahuhu 2-bedder, 1-bedroom in Ellerslie, 1-bedroom in Mount Wellington. Keep on down the list.
All right, well, you've shown me on the laptop, Rawdon. Can we go out for a bit of a drive and see what's around?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it.
There you go. Take one of the brochures. Cheers. Never miss an opportunity. So here's an example of I suppose, a classic Remuera home. It's a beautiful house. It's, leafy street. It's 900 square metres. You can see there's a pool out the back. Character bungalow. That's going to be a lot of money.
What are you looking at for that?
Or, I don't know, probably high twos, maybe, maybe higher. Again, goes to auction, we don't know. But a beautiful house. It's not first home buyer market.
Slightly out of the 625 that I've got in my pocket.
So to get away from Remuera, this is sort of Meadowbank, and this property here, which is under contract at the moment. So within 2 kilometres we moved from the heart of Remuera, the leafy heart of Remuera, where we're looking at something around the $3 million mark, to literally 2k up the road to something which is probably a more substantial home on a smaller piece of land, but probably is going to cost maybe half the amount.
Yeah, so tell us about this.
So this is what I would think in a lot of suburbs potentially could be a first home buyer. Right. This could potentially be under your 625 ceiling. Again, remember we're in Remuera, so you've got 3 bedrooms to unit. It has got amazing views, which will lift the price, but it's only about 88 square metres. Price-wise, again, it may sort of head into the 7 figures, simply because of where we are. Now, move that down into some suburbs, and you may well be in the market for something for about 600,000. Very, very tidy unit as well. And then, of course, also remove the views, because that'll probably add, $500,000 onto the price of any property.
So you're paying for the picture, and we can see in that one, the photo, you can see, the sky tower, you can see
and it is
beautiful
stunning.
Sort of foliage, beautiful sort of skyline as well. So you pay for all of that.
And you open to the north side, so you've got the summer as well. So, you're paying for all of that.
But we're heading somewhere that might slip into our price bracket.
Yep, we have got something. I've got your house. I've got your home.
I'm excited.
Sorry, I'm going to do. It's not a house. It's a home. Okay, we'll go and have a look at it.
I'll take anything. So, Rawdon, it looks like we may have found our bracket. We've ditched the car. We're by the station.
So we've had to ditch the car because this is almost city fringe here. It's the Newmarket station is here. This is double grammar zone, so some of the best schools in Auckland. You've got some of the best shopping in Auckland here as well, right on your doorstep, and you're 5-10 minutes from the city centre. Everything lines up to be the most incredible location. This is the building, the apartment block here. Now, in January of this year, a 2-bedroom with 2 car parks sold for $680,000, just over your ceiling. There is at the moment a 1-bedroom with 1 car park for sale in this building for $579,000.
Within my bracket. Perfect.
It's within your bracket, and it's there for you to sell. You can put a bid on it tomorrow. Now, it's not going to be big, but it'll be yours.
And I was saying to you earlier, though, what if I decided in a couple of years that I had a few kids coming along? Would this work?
We need to go for another drive.
Okay, we'll go.
And we will pop that story from Nick Trowbridge and Nick Monroe online. Now, if you were wondering about that 1-bedroom, 1 car park apartment in Newmarket, you may have heard the train tracks there as the train whizzed by. It is 38 square metres. Just to repeat that, 38 square metres. And also, as an apartment and with that size, there can be complications with getting a mortgage. Some New Zealanders haven't waited for an Australian travel bubble before taking holidays across the ditch, with about 27 people heading there and back over Christmas and New Year. They're among at least 424 Kiwis who've taken return trips overseas in the past year and ticked holiday vocation on their departure card in spite of a do not travel advisory from the government. Katie Todd has the story.
Unprecedented border controls.
Kiwis are struggling to get back into the country.
But plan A is to get them home now
on commercial flights whilst they still exist.
For the first time, the government has raised its travel advice to the highest level, urging New Zealanders not to travel overseas.
These were the messages on airwaves a year ago when the government's Safe Travel website began showing the big red warning, "Do not travel." That message hasn't changed, yet by the end of January, Stats NZ says about 10,000 New Zealanders had embarked on return overseas trips. Managed isolation became mandatory for returnees in April, and there's been more demand than rooms ever since, with people needing to book as much as 16 weeks in advance unless they meet extremely strict emergency allocation criteria. Stats NZ Population Indicators Manager Tayseen Islam says there's varied reasons for people's return trips.
The majority, 44% of them, were visiting friends and relatives based on how they filled out their arrival card, while 23% stated they were on business travel, and we have a very small percentage, 3%, who indicated they were travelling for holiday or vacation purposes.
That 3%, about 424 holidaymakers, have picked China, Australia, the Cook Islands and the United States of America as their top destinations. The 75 holidaymakers who travelled in December and January favoured Australia, and 29 days was the average holiday length. Auckland University Vice-Chancellor Dawn Freshwater was among 1,363 Kiwis who travelled in December and January to visit friends and relatives. The university says she paid for her own managed isolation in New Zealand on return and was in Australia making use of one-way travel bubble arrangements. The owner of Hello World Travel in Hobsonville, Carolyn Headley, says nobody's approached her agency wanting to travel overseas purely to holiday, but if they did, her advice would be to sit tight.
Just to wait, and it would depend entirely on where they were going. So if they were going to Australia, then obviously, wait until, another week or so and we may have some information about the border opening.
A Ministry of Foreign Affairs briefing from November, written for COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins and released to RNZ, shows the government has considered easing the safe travel advice for certain destinations. It notes a large number of businesses have continued to send staff offshore despite the current advice. Stats NZ says from March 20th last year to the end of January, more than 2,000 New Zealanders travelled for business and 31 people went overseas for conferences or conventions. Carolyn Headley says people still have no guarantees around their travel plans.
Our insurance have said they will cover people if they get COVID, but not if their travel's delayed because there's an outbreak.
Carolyn Headley has a lengthy list of clients wanting to go to Australia and further afield as soon as possible, although Managing Director of First Light Travel in Auckland, Brent Narby, warns people might be in for a shock when the travel bubble opens, because Australians have already booked out their own tourist attractions.
Recently, we've been selling to the Northern Territory, and, Kakadu is chock-a-block, and so is the Red Centre. July, August are getting fully booked, so it'll be interesting to see where people will go.
He's not surprised people have continued to take overseas holidays in spite of the country's closed borders, travel advice, and the requirement to stay in MIQ and pay at least $3,100 for it.
I personally think that travelling is all about mental health, and if you've been tied up in a bubble and you've been stir crazy, well, why not?
Stats NZ expects the numbers of people taking return overseas trips will remain steady unless there's changes to border rules or the capacity of MIQ. For Checkpoint, Ko Katie Todd, TNA.
The government has announced new rules around the fees for MIQ. From the 1st of June, returnees will need to stay in the country for 6 months or they'll have to pay $3,000 for their 2 weeks MIQ stay. That extends the current 90-day rule. For more on this, the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, joins me now. Minister, what are you trying to achieve by doubling the stay before you get a free MIQ visit?
Ultimately, our managed isolation quarantine facilities are designed to allow New Zealanders to return home to New Zealand. They're not designed to allow people to come here for a holiday. And for those Kiwis who are living abroad, who are thinking, we could just come for a 3-month holiday and then return, that's not really what they're designed for. They're designed to make sure that New Zealanders who need to return home are able to return home.
Do you know how many of those people there are that are just popping over for a holiday?
No, it's difficult to get good data on that, and we don't collect data in that way. So we do have some anecdotal evidence to suggest that people might be coming for just 3 months and then leaving again, and so this will stop that from happening ultimately.
So what about the people leaving New Zealand to go for a holiday and then return? They're taking up spots in MIQ, should there be? There's been more than 400 while we've been stuck here because of COVID.
Yeah, look, and that's something that we'll continue to look at as well. And if that becomes, it becomes apparent that that's a system that's being abused, and the New Zealand taxpayer is ultimately having to subsidise people's holidays, that is not something that we want to see happening. So we keep a close eye on that. If it becomes apparent that that's happening, then obviously we'd consider whether there are other things that we might do to stop that from happening. You know, the managed isolation system, it is designed to make sure Kiwis who need to return home can. It's not designed for people to be able to go and take holidays.
So the holiday makers, are they paying the same as everybody else, $3,100, not more?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Should you bump that up because they are just taking a holiday?
Look, again, we keep all of that under review all of the time, and if it becomes apparent that we're seeing a large number of people, using this for a holiday, then we would look at whether there are other things that we should do.
OK, you've got new categories for vaccination priorities. You've established the criteria now. Have you started giving any vaccinations under these categories?
No, the applications for early access to the vaccines will open on the 31st of this month, so we'll release more information about the process of how to do that and some of the detail around today's announcement over the coming days so that people can get ready to apply.
So there will be time pressure, as you will appreciate, for some of these athletes, the Olympians. How long is the approval process going to be?
Oh, look, we'll try and make that approvals process as quick as we possibly can. So, we'll aim to turn them around quite quickly. In terms of
so what, like 72 hours, a week, what?
Oh, yeah, certainly within a couple of days. In terms of the number of athletes that we're talking about, it's a relatively small number. We'd be talking about, a large number of applications because we'd be looking for a group application, if you like, from, from Olympics New Zealand for the Olympic athletes, for example, rather than each individual athlete applying individually. So we'd be looking to turn those ones around quite quickly. And we're not talking about a huge number of people either. Where we're probably likely to see, potentially a bigger group is around the compassionate grounds, and that's where we're making compassionate sort of availability for those who need to travel for urgent medical treatment that they can't get in New Zealand, or because they need to travel to care for a child or a dependent, for example. Then we'd want to make those vaccines available. There's probably going to be a few more people in that category.
Minister, by nature of the criteria that you've set, those people complying on compassionate grounds are absolutely time critical. Can you give a guarantee that you will turn those around in a particular amount of time?
Oh, look, we'll certainly be aiming to resource the system to make sure that those applications can be turned around quickly. We do turn them around quite quickly for the applications for managed isolation.
What are you aiming for here? 24 hours if you're putting in a compassionate application?
Oh, it may take a little longer than that, but we're aiming to turn it around pretty quickly.
When you say you're expecting to get basically bulk applications from athletes, Olympians, will you then vaccinise them as a group, get them all to come to one location and just whip them through?
Oh, there'll be some logistical challenges that I would imagine. Obviously, we'll look at how we can most practically ensure they get the vaccine before they leave the country.
Have you got your priorities right here? Because compassionate grounds doesn't include attending a funeral offshore, and as you'll appreciate, the Māori Party has raised some concerns that athletes are being put ahead of some vulnerable Māori communities. So do you have your priorities right?
We're trying to get the balance right here. We've set the criteria for early access to vaccines very, very narrowly. This isn't about people jumping the queue. It's about ensuring that where there are genuine needs to travel, that we can provide, access to the vaccines for those people without pushing other people out of the queue. So this very narrow criteria we have released won't delay the other New Zealanders getting the vaccine. If we made it broader and wider and covered a greater number of people, then potentially it would delay the vaccine for others, and we haven't done that.
So 41,500 people vaccinated so far. How many vaccines have you got in the fridges?
Oh, we've got a reasonable store now. We're up I haven't got the number directly in front of me. It's just over, I think we're over 300,000 available.
So why aren't you doing it faster? You've only got 41,500 people who've had the jab.
One of the things that we work through is as we scale the system up, we don't want to get as we scale up over the next couple of months, we get to the point where we're going to be delivering more vaccines than we're receiving, and we don't want to run out. So we've got to make sure that as we get through, until we start getting the big deliveries, which we're expecting in July, we've got to make sure that we've got enough vaccines on hand.
So you're rationing it, Minister, at the moment?
No, it's not about rationing, Lisa. It's about making sure that as we ramp up, we've got enough vaccines to ensure that everybody who's getting one can get their second vaccine 3 weeks after they get their first one, and that we don't run out in the middle of the year before we start getting the big deliveries. So you'll see those numbers really progressively climbing up more steeply in the next couple of weeks as we get more vaccine sites coming on.
You said today 1,300 vaccinators have completed the online training unit, right?
That's correct, yep.
The day before that, you said 2,200 vaccinators had completed the course. So, which is it?
Sorry, I don't recall that from yesterday.
Two different figures, 1,000 vaccinators difference there. So how many do you think have finished the online course?
Oh, no, it is the number that I gave out today, which is 1,600. I have to go back and see what I said yesterday, whether I misread the number. But certainly the number that I gave today is the correct one.
But you're only using 300 to 400 of those actively right now?
That's correct, yep.
Okay. Again, people will be wondering, why isn't it a priority to get as many people through this as fast as possible, given, as you are often pointing out, we don't have rampant COVID in our country. So what does it matter if there is a lag between now and when the next doses come?
Ultimately, our MedSafe approval process and the information we've got about the most effective way to vaccinate people is to have a 3-week gap between the doses, and that's what we're aiming to do. We also want to make sure that as we scale up and we start to deliver more and more vaccines, that we don't run out, that we can continue to scale up, so that when we're at that, because ultimately that would slow. If we had to scale up and then scale down, it would mean when we started to get the big deliveries in the middle of the year, it would slow us down, and we want to be reaching peak right at the right time as those bigger deliveries start to arrive. Ultimately, it's all about when we finish, not about when we start. So we're underway, but the key thing is we've got to make sure that by the end of the year we want to be through this vaccination campaign, and it's all designed to make sure that we're in the right place towards the end of the year.
Okay, we're almost out of time. I want to get through a couple of things really quickly. This latest COVID case, the cleaner at the Grand Millennium, the genome sequence shows that it's from a guest who was there, who tested positive at day 0, day 1. You're not allowed out of your room until you get a clear test from that, right? So how have these two people crossed paths?
So the investigation process is trying to identify how that could have happened.
Did the cleaner clean the room at any point?
That's one of the things that I haven't got a clear answer on that yet. It's certainly quite possible that cleaner did work on the floor that the case was staying on. They were only there very briefly before they were transferred to Jet Park. So that's one of the things that...
And do cleaners enter the room when there are people there, ever?
No, cleaners don't enter the room when people are there. And when a person who has been infected with COVID leaves a room, they have basically a fog machine that goes in and sort of sprays the room before they are then subsequently cleaned. So, there's a lot of risk mitigation that goes on in here. So again, it's another one of those things where there's a lot of where they'll be looking very, very carefully to try and identify how this could have happened.
Appreciate your time this evening, Minister. That is Chris Hipkins. And we're keen for your feedback on that one. Does the government have its priorities right on vaccinations? Should people travelling for a funeral be allowed to get early access to the Pfizer jab? The National Party has taken aim at the Speaker Trevor Mallard again, labelling him a bully who is unfit to be in his job. It's revealed details of a statement of claim in the defamation case of the man Mr Mallard wrongly accused of being a rapist. National is calling on the Prime Minister to support a vote on no confidence in Mr Mallard, but Jacinda Ardern is backing him. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
National's Chris Bishop using his general debate speech to take aim at the Speaker.
I want to put on record for the House 3 things that have not yet been made public. They are shocking and I believe makes the case overwhelming for Mr Mallard's resignation or for the House to lose confidence in him.
Mr Mallard incorrectly claimed that there was a rapist working at Parliament on Morning Report in May 2019. In early December last year, he settled a defamation case which cost taxpayers a total of around $330,000. He issued a statement apologising and told a parliamentary committee he knew, probably within 24 hours, that he'd made a mistake. But the statement of claim seen by RNZ alleges that Mr Mallard was made aware that he was wrong within hours, but he continued to repeat the accusations to media that very afternoon.
That is appalling. Mr Mallard knew it was wrong. He said it anyway.
Mr Bishop says an even greater concern is that the statement of claim says Mr Mallard's lawyers wrote to the plaintiffs saying they did not accept that he had been defamed and they would defend any claim vigorously.
Mr Mallard said he intended to prove in court the plaintiff was a rapist. He intended to do this knowing it was false.
The statement alleges Mr Mallard's lawyers threatened that if the plaintiff pursued the case, the question of his reputation and his conduct would very much be the centrepiece.
This is a gross and disgraceful abuse of power. He refused to apologise to the man he called a rapist, even though he knew it was wrong. He refused to compensate, even though he knew it was wrong. He said if the man sought to protect his reputation, he would prove he was a rapist. He threatened to put the man on trial.
Mr Bishop says Mr Mallard is a bully and should resign or face a vote of no confidence. National needs Labour's support to do that, but Jacinda Ardern is backing Mr Mallard.
The question I've been asked is whether or not I believe that for an error he has acknowledged and apologised for, rightly so, he should be removed as Speaker. My view is no.
She says the revelations in the statement of claim aren't that revealing.
The issues that are being raised today, they are issues that have already been traversed. He has rightly acknowledged the errors that have been made, apologised, and of course the proceedings have been settled.
Mr Bishop says in any other workplace, Mr Mallard would have been sacked.
This is a question of judgment for Jacinda Ardern as to whether or not she is prepared to stand by and let behaviour of this sort be tolerated.
Mr Mallard did not respond to RNZ's request for comment. He sat watching Mr Bishop's speech in the House before bringing it to an abrupt end.
This is a man who should resign as Speaker.
The members' time has expired. Members, I chose not during that speech to draw attention to the fact that it was completely out of order.
Mr Mallard said given he was the subject, he didn't think that was appropriate. But he did add this.
I will say I look forward to the hearing of the estimates where the truth will be told.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, immigration sounds a warning about exploited illegal foreign workers. Dunedin Hospital declares a code black with its services seriously understrained. And the country's top athletes gather for a different take on the Halberg Awards. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme tonight. You can text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now with Susana.
The Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi says he is appalled national sports teams could be immunised before some vulnerable Māori communities. Leading athletes and sports people are among those eligible to apply for early COVID-19 vaccinations to travel overseas from next week. The COVID-19 response minister Chris Hipkins told Checkpoint they're trying to strike a balance between communities of need. From the 1st of June, returnees will need to stay in the country for 6 months or pay $3,000 for their 2-week MIQ stay. Chris Hipkins told the programme that if a lot of people are just coming back for a holiday, the government could look at a differential charges from those coming back for compassionate reasons. Westpac Bank has confirmed it is considering selling its New Zealand business after its full-year profit plunged more than 40% last year. The parent bank is also likely to have put extra capital into its New Zealand business to meet new Reserve Bank rules. A major Auckland real estate firm says house prices could fall slightly, but dramatic changes are unlikely despite changes aimed at cooling speculation. The government yesterday announced it was closing a tax loophole and doubling the time a house must be owned to avoid paying income tax when it's sold. Barfoot and Thompson spokesperson says it could be 6 months before the real impact of the changes is seen. A code black has been declared at Dunedin Hospital after it reached full capacity. The Southern DHB says it's a emergency department is still open, but it's urging people to see their doctor or the after-hours service first. 18 patients in emergency were waiting for a bed this morning, but only 3 beds were available on the wards. The minister responsible for the SIS says he has confidence in the agency, which has been under pressure after the Royal Commission report into the Christchurch mosque massacre. The head of the domestic spy agency, Rebecca Kitteridge, told MPs counter-terrorism efforts are now split 50-50 between white identity extremism and faith-motivated extremism. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time to get to the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, I mentioned there in the headlines about Westpac New Zealand, and it looks like the Australian parent could be looking to sell the business. But there's a backstory to this.
Yeah, there's a lot going on today. It's been a huge day for the Westpac's New Zealand arm. Just shortly before 5 o'clock today, Westpac Banking Corporation, that's the Australian parent, confirmed that it's reviewing the potential sale of the New Zealand business. In the announcement, the Australian parent said that it had to consider the best interest of its shareholders about a potential sale. And it's worth noting that the New Zealand arm of the bank, it's the third largest bank in New Zealand, and it has about a 20% market share. And it's been reported by the Australian Financial Review that the wheels are already in motion with this, with the investment bank Macquarie Group appointed to sort of scope out the market, judge what sort of interest there is to maybe purchase the bank's New Zealand arm. But it's the timing of this which is absolutely fascinating, because this morning Westpac's New Zealand arm received an absolute lashing from the Reserve Bank that was over concerns about the bank's compliance with liquidity rules. Westpac was found to have breached mismatch ratio requirements under the RBNZ's liquidity policy, and that's a measure of how much sort of cash assets the bank has in reserve to ensure that it can get through a period of intense financial stress. And it appeared that these breaches occurred for nearly a decade, from 2012 to 2020. The bank failed to calculate those ratios appropriately, but on top of that, the bank wasn't meeting its own internal standards. And it's worth noting that Westpac has corrected these issues, but the RBNZ wants to be satisfied, and that's why it's asking, apart from this public shaming, this is why the RBNZ has ordered the bank to commission not 1 but 2 independent reports. The first is to ensure that the bank is adhering to its own risk governance processes. The other is to ensure that those steps to improve those liquidity issues, whether or not they are effective.
So, Nicholas, before you go on, basically, and so that I'm understanding this right and other people are, Reserve Bank has rules. Basically, it requires the banks to have what we would regard as a rainy day fund, and it needs to be at a certain level. So it didn't have the moolah, the cash in the rainy day fund that it was legally required to have.
It had miscalculated the amount of money that it needed to have in reserve.
Do we know if that was intentional or just bad
information?
Figures?
Well, unfortunately, Westpac New Zealand, when we tried to contact them today, they just sent us a statement in which they parroted pretty much everything that the Reserve Bank said, and at the bottom of it, they say that they're going to comply with the recommendations. But one of the other key recommendations or orders that the RBNZ has required of Westpac New Zealand is that it has to carry more cash reserves until those reports are produced and the central bank is satisfied that everything is in order. And it's worth mentioning that was noted in the statement that was put on the NZX this afternoon. The statement says that they will also consider the impact of the Reserve Bank's reviews, which were announced today. And we don't know how long this process is going to continue on for, but one of my colleagues had just spoken to a person who specialises in the banking sector and says that now that this is out in the open, it may speed up the whole process.
Big story, and no doubt you will bring us some updates when they're to hand. What numbers do you bring from the market?
Yeah, the NZX is down 35 points to 12,358. The dollar is a bit weaker following those big housing announcements yesterday. It's at 69.8 US cents and 92.6 Australian.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. Whole sectors of the construction industry are being propped up by illegal exploited foreign workers, according to Immigration New Zealand. 10 Chinese nationals are being deported after they were found to be unlawfully in New Zealand and working on an Auckland building site. They were taken into police custody after a spot check of the site revealed they'd overstayed by up to more than 3 years. Deputy Head of Immigration, Stephen Vaughan, told me it's a case of bad behaviour from the construction company.
As a result of just our normal visits to various sites that we do from time to time, we located behaviour that was totally unacceptable, and as a result, we'll be undertaking an investigation into that construction employer.
What kind of behaviour are you talking about, Stephen?
Well, the behaviour on this occasion is the use of unlawful migrant labour, individuals who are unlawful in New Zealand and have been for some time, who we find working in a construction sector where they are not entitled to work, are unlawful and actually should be going home.
So just so I've got this straight, this was a spot check, was it?
That's correct, yes. It's part of our compliance operations that we do from time to time. Not just in Auckland, we do these compliance operations all over New Zealand.
Okay, so were these workers getting paid? Did they have contracts?
Again, can't talk about the individual case, but what I can say is we've targeted the construction sector because it's one of the largest employers of migrants in New Zealand, and it's a key economic driver for growth in New Zealand.
Let me put it another way. Were they being exploited?
Well, here again, I'm not able to say whether or not they were being exploited. We're making inquiries in relation to that. But what we can't do as an organisation is walk past this type of behaviour. Employers have obligations, as do employees, and on this occasion, the employers let themselves down really badly.
Okay, you say they were found to be unlawfully in New Zealand. Did they arrive and start work with the right visas and some paperwork has expired, or were they illegally here from the get-go?
Again, it's a bit difficult to talk about this individual case as the investigation is ongoing and we can't talk about investigations that are currently underway. However, in our experience, on occasion, people come in on the right visa and then don't apply for a variation of their conditions and then start working in a way that sits outside of their visa. Others come in on visitor visas and actually start working and then become unlawful.
So the 10 people that you have picked up for being here unlawfully, how long had they been in the country for?
The individuals, well, their ages were actually between 32 and 57 years old, and their unlawful time in New Zealand ranged from approximately 3 years to 17 months.
Okay, and the site that they are working on, has that been shut down?
Actually, I can't discuss the actual operation that we're involved in, as it is subject to an ongoing investigation.
So that's the details of the investigation, but surely you can tell us whether that company is allowed to continue work on the site?
Well, we're working with the company to ensure, firstly, that the people that they employ are lawful workers in New Zealand, and secondly, they are subject to an investigation.
So the workers that were here against the law, where are they now?
They were placed in police custody and they have deportation liability notices served on them, and they're now part of the deportation process.
So they're in jail, you mean?
They were in police custody overnight, served with their notifications today, and I'm not sure whether they're still in custody now. However, they are part of the deportation liability process.
If they are owed wages for the work that they've done, will they get that before they leave?
That's an operational matter that I can't discuss. At the moment, the investigation is continuing, and issues like that will actually be brought to light as the investigation progresses.
What's the company here? Who is it?
We can't disclose the company name. As I say, it's an operational matter, still subject to a current investigation, and until the investigation is complete, I'm not at liberty to give any information around the operation.
Okay, so you can't tell us anything about the pay and conditions or the work that they were doing?
Not at the moment, no, but in the fullness of time, when that information does come to hand and I'm able to talk about it, I'll be more than happy to talk about it.
Are you appealing for anyone in particular to come forward with information? Do you need help here?
Well, look, the construction sector is a key sector that we're looking at to ensure that New Zealand's most vulnerable people aren't being subject to migrant exploitation or being employed when they actually have no rights to work. I believe there are business models in the construction sector that actually rely on non-compliance and exploitative practices, and this gives them a bit of a competitive edge over other businesses who actually comply. So working with industry leaders in construction, we'll actually be able to weed out the bad actors, because I know as an industry, construction actually wants, as do most other sectors, they want a very, very clean and a lawful and a healthy sector, and it's these bad actors that actually are pulling the sector down.
So, Stephen, are you saying that there are some businesses that are propped up by illegal exploited labour in the construction field?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I believe, and I don't think it's just unique to construction. There are exemplar cases of really, really good practices, but I believe in the construction sector there are some areas where the competitive advantage that they get is as a result of exploitative practices, and that is what we in Immigration New Zealand, working with our partners, are going to stamp out.
And that was Stephen Vaughan from Immigration New Zealand. Lawyers for the two men on trial over the Red Fox Tavern shooting and robbery more than 30 years ago have told the jury there's nowhere near enough evidence to find them guilty. The trial is coming to an end, with defence lawyers giving their closing addresses to the jury. Here's our reporter, Sarah Robson.
No. You got this wrong. No. You've got the wrong me.
That's Christopher Stevenson, the lawyer for the unnamed defendant, quoting the evidence of a prison inmate during the trial. That inmate said Lester Hamilton, who died in 2003, confessed to him that he was responsible for what happened at the Red Fox Tavern the Saturday night of Labour weekend 1987.
How on earth does the prosecution get out of this? This is devastating to their case.
Christopher Stevenson said it's bombshell evidence that calls into question the Crown's theory that his client and Mark Hogarth were the offenders.
When you think about the case against these chaps and the case against Mr Hamilton, you know the case against Lester Hamilton is far, far superior. Far superior.
Christopher Stevenson said evidence showed Lester Hamilton was planning a robbery at the Red Fox Tavern, and he told others he had done it. He said the Crown needs to prove he didn't do it.
They have to blow out the reasonable possibility Hamilton did it. They have to blow that out of the water. They have to disprove the reasonable possibility he did it.
Mark Hogarth's lawyer, Craig Tuck, said the case was one of the most unusual and exceptional whodunits.
It's an anachronistic timepiece. It's a time capsule. It's a snapshot of life back in the 1980s. And it's odd, and it's quirky, and it's a far distant world from New Zealand today.
Craig Tuck said the jury watched his client with his 1980s mullet over the duration of the trial.
But while he's been present at this trial, the evidence against him simply has not been here. I mean, it's been almost invisible when we start to unpack it.
Craig Tuck said there's a complete absence of anything that could be relied on to prove, beyond reasonable doubt, that Mark Hogarth was the bat-wielding offender who went into the Red Fox Tavern. The Crown argues a web of circumstantial evidence points to the two defendants being the men responsible. Justice Wolford will sum up the case to the jury of 7 men and 5 women tomorrow morning before they retire to consider their verdicts. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It's 9 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Vaccinating border workers could have the perverse effect of increasing the risk of a COVID community outbreak in the short term. That's because immunised people are unlikely to show symptoms if infected with the virus, and they could silently pass it on without knowing they have it. New modelling from Te Pūnaha Matatini at Auckland University has found the risk of a significant community outbreak from a border worker could jump to 9% if the vaccine only halves transmission. Just this week, an MIQ cleaner contracted COVID on the job and showed 0 symptoms, but the infection was picked up during routine surveillance testing, showing just how important that testing is. Michael Plank is one of the researchers tracking the risk of infection against the vaccine.
There is still a risk that someone who's been vaccinated can get the virus and can potentially pass it on to others. So that we know that vaccines are really effective at stopping people getting sick, but there's still a risk that they could pick it up and pass it on. And in the case of border workers, if the virus stops them from getting sick, that makes it harder to spot the cases if we do get cases in border workers. So in some cases where we've had a border worker get infected, we've noticed because they've developed symptoms. And if the virus stops them from getting symptoms, it makes it harder to detect. And so we're really reliant on testing to pick those infections up.
So, well, if the vaccine effectively prevents serious illness, right, if you catch COVID, what do you know about how infectious you are? Can we put a number on how much the vaccine lowers that infection rate? Do we know exactly?
We don't know exactly. There's more and more data coming in on this. And I mean, up to a month or two ago, we really didn't have much data at all. And so we were really guessing as to how much the vaccine would prevent people infecting others. Now we're getting more data coming in, and it's starting to look really positive for the Pfizer vaccine, that it does have a strong effect and that it will reduce the risk of transmission quite significantly. But there's still a range of uncertainty there, and it's still possible it won't be as effective at reducing transmission as it is at stopping people getting seriously ill.
So in some of your modelling, you're working on basically a 50% reduction in transmissibility due to the vaccination. Working on those figures, what is the risk of a community outbreak from a vaccinated worker? How much does it go up?
Well, under that 50% scenario, what the model shows is that we really need to keep testing those border workers regularly, and possibly increase the testing, maybe introduce some saliva testing to make sure that we don't increase the risk that they can be asymptomatic, but they can pass it on to someone in the community. As I said, since we've sort of done that research, actually more data's come in, and we're more towards the optimistic end on the vaccine effectiveness now. So it's looking more positive, but what the key message really is that we really need to keep that routine testing of our border workers going, to make sure that we don't have asymptomatic cases slipping through the net.
But the solution to keeping the risk low is what?
So the solution to keeping the risk low is to continue all the precautions that we currently have at the border and for our border workers. So maintaining those strict infection prevention measures, maintaining PPE, and critically maintaining routine testing, regular testing for our border workforce to make sure that we do pick up any asymptomatic infections that might occur.
Reading your study, it suggested that testing should go to a 4-day cycle. Do you no longer think that needs to happen?
I think with the additional data we now have about the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine, it's looking more likely that a weekly testing schedule is sufficient. I mean, in one sense, the more testing we can do, the more we will reduce risk. So if we can introduce some saliva testing, for example, that's on a more regular basis, that will help reduce the risk further, and that will be a really welcome extra layer of protection that we could introduce at the border.
Michael Plank there. And the families of Wellington border workers and frontline health staff are joining that coveted club of those who've had the COVID jab. 5 community vaccination centres are now open, with one in Lower Hutt, the first to start giving out the vaccine. RNZ reporter Hamish Cardwell and camera operator Dom Thomas went to one to check it out.
Know what you're here for? Yes. Okay, so you're having the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. The other name for that.
Out on the court at the Walter Nash Sports Centre in Lower Hutt, community nurse Trish Kerr is scoring a different kind of shot.
We stab now. How was that? That's fine. Okay. Just pop your hand on there. It probably won't bleed, but just didn't even hurt. That's good.
Trish is excited to be getting the first of her 2 Pfizer vaccines, which will protect her, her loved ones and clients.
I wanted it basically to look after to my own family and to the community that I live in, but also I deal with a lot of vulnerable patients as part of my job as a nurse. I just wanted to make sure that I am safe for them to be safe.
The Pfizer vaccine must be kept in storage at -70 degrees Celsius until it is ready to be used. It is then shipped to clinics and kept between 2 and 8 degrees for up to 5 days, about the same as for many other vaccines. Here in the hut, it's stored in a quiet place in the venue's toilet changing room, where vaccinators can carefully measure out doses and label them. The family of border workers and frontline health staff come to the waiting area, chairs spaced out on the sports court, before they're led through to a vaccination booth. Vaccinator Lorraine Kerbin says it's an honour to be pitching in.
I kind of feel quite privileged to deliver this, feel that I'm part of history, and one day my grandchildren may look back and, talk about their grandmother. I don't have grandchildren yet, but we'll say, we're part of the cause.
Lorraine says she's had few complaints the shot hurts. People seemed pleased just to get it.
Oh, this is great. So many people have been really excited to have it. They're just like, yay, I'm getting it, and they're wanting to record it. We're taking lots of photos on their cameras, videos, they bring support people.
Vaccination started on Sunday, with about 200 people a day getting the jab before it moves to other sites in the Wellington region later this week. Primary health organisation Te Awa Kairangi Chief Executive Bridget Allen says it's all hands on deck.
We've got 15 odd people here, but they're backed up by our teams back in the office, the call centre team, usually about 2 to 4 people there, depending again on the volumes in that space, backed up by our IT team to make sure that they've got the laptops they need so that the data flows to the COVID immunisation register. So there's a whole team effort behind the scenes as well as the people you're seeing here.
She says the vaccine is safe and effective, and she's not aware of anyone refusing it so far.
This is not a mandatory vaccination, we all know that, so it is a matter of encouragement and reassurance.
COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins gave an update on the vaccination numbers today. He says so far, more than 40,000 doses have been administered.
By next Tuesday, that's the 30th of March, we're expecting there to be nearly 50 clinics for vaccination open throughout the country. We have around 1,300 vaccinators who have completed the Pfizer training. So far, 95% of all of our border and MIQ workforce have received their first COVID-19 vaccination.
2 million of the most at-risk groups are expected to be vaccinated by the middle of the year. For Checkpoint, i te whanganui atara, ko Hamish Cardwell tēnei.
Some of you getting in touch about Olympians and black caps falling into a special category for COVID vaccine. Leslie says every cricketer and Olympian who jumps the queue means someone with serious health problems misses out. And if there is a shortage of vaccines, that makes it even worse. Not acceptable, Leslie says.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The COVID-19 Minister is promising that allowing national sports teams to be vaccinated early won't push other New Zealanders out of the queue. Olympians and the Black Caps are among those who can apply next week for jabs so they can travel out of the country for events of national significance. The Māori Party co-leader Rawiri Waititi is appalled they could be immunised before Māori communities, but Chris Hipkins told Checkpoint the criteria for early access is very tight.
So this very narrow criteria we have released won't delay the other New Zealanders getting the vaccine. If we made it broader and wider and covered a greater number of people, then potentially it would delay the vaccine for others, and we haven't done that.
Meanwhile, people wanting to attend a funeral overseas will not qualify under the new compassionate criteria for early vaccination, but that criteria does include visiting an immediate family member who is dying. Westpac Banking Corporation has confirmed it is mulling the potential sale of its New Zealand business. In an update to the stock exchange, the parent bank says it's looking at whether a sale would be in the best interests of its shareholders. The bank will also consider the impact of the Reserve Bank's decision to require the bank to pump extra capital into the New Zealand business for failing to meet liquidity standards. Westpac is New Zealand's third largest bank, making up about 20% of the market. Immigration New Zealand says the 10 Chinese men facing deportation entered the country on visitor visas and at no point had work rights. The men were found at a construction site in central Auckland yesterday and have been unlawfully in the country for periods ranging from 17 months to more than 3 years. They are in police custody while their deportation to China is arranged. The Deputy Head of Immigration, Stephen Vaughan, told Checkpoint the men are aged from 32 to 57.
They were unlawful and have been for some of them for up to 3 years, and they were not entitled to work in New Zealand. They were unlawful in New Zealand and they need to go home.
Stephen Vaughan says employers need to follow the rules when using foreign labourers and migrants also need to observe their visa status. The United Nations and aid agencies are urgently pooling resources to help 45,000 people left homeless following a massive fire at a Bangladesh refugee camp. Cox's Bazar is considered the world's largest refugee settlement with nearly 900,000 people there. Our correspondent Lee Ling-Tan reports.
In the aftermath of the deadly fire came a grim assessment. 15 people dead, 560 injured and 400 still missing. The United Nations Refugee Agency is rushing to provide emergency support and protection to 45,000 survivors who lost their shelters and belongings in the fire. The blaze destroyed 10,000 shelters in the camp that houses 900,000 refugees who had fled persecution in Myanmar. Lee Ling-Tan, New York.
The US President is urging Congress not to wait another minute to bring in a ban on assault rifles and tighten checks on gun owners. He says he's been devastated by another killing spree in Boulder, Colorado after a gunman shot dead 10 people at a supermarket. Joe Biden said common sense steps are needed to save lives.
The United States Senate, I hope some are listening, should immediately pass the 2 House-passed bills that close loopholes in the background check system. These are bills that receive votes of both Republicans and Democrats in the House. This is not and should not be a partisan issue. This is an American issue. It will save lives.
Police in Colorado have charged a 21-year-old man with 10 counts of murder. Parliament has unanimously passed legislation giving mothers and their partners 3 days of bereavement leave following a miscarriage or stillbirth. The members' bill in the name of Labour MP Ginny Anderson will apply to mothers and their partners, as well as parents planning to have a child through adoption or surrogacy. Ms Anderson says the law change will give women and their partners time to come to terms with their loss without having to tap into sick leave. She acknowledged MPs across the House for their unanimous support. A consumer advocacy group says retailers selling cheap throwaway appliances should pay higher penalties under a new scheme starting next year. The government scheme will require companies making, selling and using appliances to take responsibility for dealing with them at the end of their lives. Consumer New Zealand's product test manager Paul Smith says rather than a flat import charge, the scheme should favour products that can be repaired.
So the levies or the fees get weighted towards stuff that is actually built to fail. And that's the mechanism that, I hope they'll put in, that it will encourage suppliers to supply better stuff because then they'll have less financial penalty for it.
Paul Smith from Consumer New Zealand. It's 5 minutes past 6. New Zealand's Olympic officials say getting priority for COVID-19 vaccination is a major relief for the country's top athletes. Those heading to the Tokyo Olympics in July will be among the first sportspeople to meet the government's new criteria for early vaccinations. The head of the New Zealand Olympic Committee, Karen Smith, says it isn't mandatory for the athletes to be vaccinated, but they are encouraging them to do so.
A number were hanging on the edge of their seat thinking, can I get offshore to either compete for my final qualification or indeed prepare safely for the Games? So something just on a 12 months, the Games were cancelled. So it's a really bittersweet opportunity 12 months later to get this news.
Even if athletes are vaccinated, they will still have to undergo quarantine when they return from overseas competition. Results against both lowly Melbourne Victory and Newcastle could decide the fate of the Wellington Phoenix in the A-League this season. They're the only two sides that sit below the 10th placed Phoenix on the ladder, and coach Ufuk Talay says it's crucial they finally start to get on a winning run if they want to make the playoffs. The Phoenix play the Victory tonight and Newcastle on Sunday. Saliva tests may be an answer in future for medical staff seeking quick ways to diagnose concussion amongst male rugby players. A Birmingham University study has found that telltale biomarkers of traumatic brain injury show up rapidly in saliva. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tu Mahana, telling the creation story of the South Island, Te Waipounamu. It's debuting in Christchurch. I'll speak to its artistic director, Juanita Hepi, and Hamish Oliver, who wrote the music. And Julia Millen recalls her Antarctic adventures, the subject of her new book, Fair Weather Hitchhiker, which we thought would make the ideal prize for this week's Hump Quiz. All on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairatapa. Cloud increasing with drizzle developing this evening and overnight. For the remainder of the North Island, fine weather, apart from areas of cloud morning and night. Isolated showers possible about central and northern areas. Nelson, Buller and inland Marlborough, fine apart from a few cloudy areas. Isolated showers about the ranges, some possibly heavy tonight. Coastal Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago, Dunedin and Clutha. Cloudy, patchy drizzle clearing tomorrow morning, fine breaks developing tomorrow afternoon. For central Otago, Southern Lakes and Southland, fine breaks increasing. Fine weather tomorrow apart from patchy morning fog or cloud. Westland and Fiordland fine apart from cloudy periods morning and night with isolated showers for Fiordland. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and occasional drizzle. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō, ko Lisa Owen Takuingwa, and this is Checkpoint. A code black has been declared at Dunedin Hospital, which is now at capacity. The Southern DHB says the emergency department is still open, but it's asking the public to avoid it if possible and only go in for serious emergencies. Southern DHB Clinical Director Dr Nigel Miller joins me now. Kia ora, Doctor. How bad is it for you to declare a code black?
Oh, we had quite a big problem this morning where we had people who were stuck in ED and couldn't get up to the ward, so the ED was over full, and some people have been there quite a long time. Having said that, the situation is largely resolved this afternoon. So we now have adequate inpatient beds to meet the needs of those who are in ED, and most of the people who were there, all the people who were there before, have now passed through into the wards or gone home.
At critical mass, Doctor, how many people did you have waiting and what kind of waits did they have?
So we had people, I think, first thing this morning, about 18 people in ED waiting for an inpatient bed. So, several of whom waited over 12 hours, which is really unsatisfactory. However, as I said, we've managed to resolve that. We now have, we've managed to resolve it for those patients, and for patients coming in now, we have a fair number of beds available in the wards.
That's got to be pretty stressful for the staff and the people because they obviously need a bed or you wouldn't be keeping them there.
Oh, absolutely. And this is a really unpleasant thing for the patients predominantly, of course, but of course for our staff as well, who it places them under undue pressure. Hence why we took the step of declaring it code black so we could be clear about what our plan was and communicate with the whole hospital team, because it takes a little bit of extra work from everybody to make the difference for the patients, which they achieved, and I think they've done an amazing piece of work.
So in recent times, how often are you getting these big influxes into ED? Is it a regular thing?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a big influx into ED. It's not a regular thing at the moment. However, we're under pressure continuously on and off, and going through the long weekend, because it was the Otago regional holiday at the weekend, we didn't manage to discharge as many patients as we had forecast, so that led us to go into Tuesday with a limited number of beds.
So what are people coming through with generally?
The people are coming with all the standard things at the moment. There's nothing unusual happening with people coming into hospital. It's the standard problems we get, people with, cardiovascular disease, respiratory problems, and then acute surgical problems.
So do you need more staff to deal with this and more beds?
Well, we're working at the present on two fronts. One, to make sure we've recruited all the staff we need to support the beds that we have. And so we've actually been working quite hard on that and being successful in the recruitment. That will help. So the number of beds is really the number of beds we have nurses for.
So we're working to get up to the expected number of nurses. We've just recruited a lot from the nursing colleges, and then there's a review underway to work out what additional resources we would need in the coming months.
Just before you go, we're almost out of time, but you're telling people they can come in if it's serious, but stay away if it's not. So give us an example.
No, at the present time, we're back to normal. If people have a need for ED, they should come. I wouldn't like to think of people staying at home unwell, because we're running. The ED team are there and ready to help people.
But are some people coming in with minor things that shouldn't be turning up?
That's not a major problem for us. Sometimes it can be a distraction, but if people come with minor problems, then they require a minor amount of care.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Southern DHB Clinical Director, Dr. Nigel Miller. Real estate agents are either dropping listings or rushing through sales following the government's housing announcement. Any investment property bought from Saturday onwards will be subject to a tax on the capital gains if it's sold within 10 years. It's among a number of changes announced yesterday, with the real estate industry, investors and renters trying to work out what it means for them. Rachel Graham has more.
Some property investors are scrambling to secure a property before Saturday. Mark Hamilton's the director of Tommy's Real Estate in Wellington. He says the government's announcement got some moving quickly.
Certainly some people who have obviously put a spanner in the works and they've decided, look, if you've got someone on your books now, happy to have them through, even if it hasn't come to the market. So there is I guess, for some people, a sense of urgency, even though the time frames are obviously pretty tight. For others, it's a case of, look, it is what it is. Government regulatory change is nothing that you can really budget for, and when it happens, and, you just work your way through it at the end of the day.
The changes include closing a tax loophole and extending the time investors need to hold on to homes to avoid a tax on their profit to 10 years. It's called the Bright Line Test, and it doesn't apply to the family home or inherited property. The rule's also different for investors who buy new builds. They'll only get taxed on the profit if they sell within 5 years. Debbie Pratt owns Tall Poppies Real Estate in Christchurch. She says a lot of people have a lot of questions.
I'm waiting for my own accountant to call, and he was just swamped yesterday, and we're all literally just trying to work through the specifics and who's going to affect what. But we've certainly already had owners ringing up saying we've spoken to our accountant and we need to pull our property.
Peter Thompson's the managing director of Barfoot and Thompson in Auckland. He expects it to take 3 to 6 months for any real impact to start to be seen.
It is making people have second thoughts. So some vendors that are still thinking that they may get that little extra than what they thought they might have may have to review their thoughts. And buyers will now know that there could be a little bit more opportunity and may not have to necessarily rush into buy the property just for the sake of buying a property.
He reckons we might see a dip in the number of houses on the market, and while house prices might fall slightly, he's not expecting anything significant. Renters RNZ spoken to aren't confident the changes will cool the housing market. Nikki Mortensen, who rents in the Hawke's Bay, thinks it's only a start.
It's not going to help the little guy, really. I've kind of written off any chance of owning a home. It's just depressing. It's really depressing. The landlord of the house that I'm living at the moment, she's already put the rent up, and she was around the other day and she was threatening to put the rent up again.
23-year-old Mackenzie Grant, who's studying in Wellington, says home ownership is a far-fetched dream for her generation.
Genuinely, the only reason that anybody my age that I know has ever owned a property has been because of their parents. And I really don't think what the government is looking to introduce will change that way of accessibility. And it's really the only way that I've ever known anybody to successfully even get their foot in the door with a bank. When it's so disheartening at every turn.
Wellington renter Zoe Woodfield is gutted there was no help for renters.
The announcement yesterday, it just makes me a bit disappointed as a renter. Because there was really nothing in it that was geared towards helping renters right now. So there was nothing, no mention of rental caps. There's no real mention of renters at all in the announcement. I think home ownership is still a pipe dream at this point, and I think the announcement yesterday, it's a start, but I think it needs to go much further.
Zoe says many landlords have been increasing rents in recent years with no improvements to properties. So she's not surprised to hear landlords threatening further hikes because of the changes. She says it just puts people like her further from their dream of owning their own home. For Checkpoint, call Rachel Graham, 10A.
The annual gathering of top New Zealand athletes takes place with something of a twist in Auckland tonight. With much of the 2020 sporting calendar sidelined by COVID-19, this year's Halberg Awards will instead recognise the country's biggest sporting achievements of the past decade. Every category winner of the last 10 years is in contention to be named a decade champion, with a supreme award going to the best of the best. Clay Wilson is at Spark Arena, and Clay, some good news for some of the athletes there, including one you've got with you.
Kia ora, Lisa, that's right. As some people may have already heard, COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins has announced today that it's likely that the athletes going to the Tokyo Olympics will be able to get an early vaccination, and one of those athletes hoping to get there is joining me now is pole vaulter Eliza McCartney. Eliza, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
I guess it's been floating around this issue for a while, so what was your reaction to hearing that it is going to be probable that you're going to get a chance to have an early vaccination?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so complex, these decisions they're having to make, and I mean, I guess I don't have any thoughts either way. It is just the decision they're going to make, and we will roll with what they decide to do. But yeah, also as an athlete who hasn't actually qualified, I guess I haven't worried so much about those sorts of things just yet.
Yeah, I was going to say, you are obviously still trying to qualify, so you haven't even considered whether it's something you really wanted to have, or really needed to have in terms of going away, given how the world is at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's certainly something you'd feel a lot more comfortable with under your belt going away. Considering that the general public will be vaccinated kind of around July-ish, there's a chance that we could have been in the early groups of those anyway before we went overseas. So I guess it was one of those things I'd just approach it when the time comes and just do what is best.
Now, the last 18 months or so have been challenging for you dealing with injury issues, but I know you recently returned to competition, so tell me how that went and how it felt.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a very last-minute decision just to try a small competition in Auckland, and I really enjoyed it because it was the first time I had competed properly and cleared a bar in over 2 years, which was a really, really big deal, and it was nice to be able to do it in a really small setting in Auckland. But things are still not perfectly stable just yet. As people probably know by now, I've had a lot of issues with my Achilles, and it's not something that can be kind of resolved permanently, and so it's just a battle that I just have to keep fighting. And right now the competition went really well, but there's always new intensity and stress that comes with competition, so I'm just recovering still from that. And of course we've got nationals this weekend, and hopefully more competitions in New Zealand following that, maybe more towards May, June time.
So how does ideally the next few months look for you? I mean, of course, the ultimate goal is to get to Tokyo. Ideally, how does it all pan out for you in terms of trying to get there?
Yeah, I mean, the number one focus right now is getting the vault sessions in, because I've had so little vaulting in the last couple of years. It's about getting the feel back, getting back into the sport, getting back into my craft, and working on technique again and getting the rust off. So that's just kind of the number one goal, and competitions will fit in and around that, where we kind of deem the timing is going to work, because really, as I said, the number one goal is to try and get back into feeling fit in pole vault and then getting competition fit. So it's, I guess, to answer your question, the next few months, I'm not sure for certain, but what I do know is that it's about the long game of getting back into my sport again and feeling confident and comfortable with how that feels.
Well, all the best with that process. Thanks for taking the time to have a chat, and enjoy your night.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So there you go, Lisa. Some good news for New Zealand athletes, Olympians today, and maybe some more good news later tonight with these awards.
Thanks, Clay. That is Clay Wilson, who's joining us down there from, well, the reimagined Halberg Awards. It is almost 21 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Minister Andrew Little has vigorously defended SIS head Rebecca Kitteridge following her appearance in front of the Select Committee today. Ms Kitteridge has been questioned by Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee about how the agency is dealing with the threat of white extremism. She says changes have been made since the Christchurch mosque attacks. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
The NZSIS Director General, Rebecca Kitteridge, says it has been a time of deep reflection.
We've listened,
We've had important and at times difficult conversations about how the Muslim community views the NZSIS. We know we must do better, and we will.
Ms Kitteridge told MPs counter-terrorism efforts were now split 50-50 across white identity extremism and faith-motivated extremism.
We were looking at white identity extremism before March the 15th, 2019, but yes, there has been an increase in terms of that kind of ideology, which is of concern.
However, when questioned about how much attention was given to white extremism before the mosque attacks, she wouldn't say. About half of staff at the NZSIS and GCSB have received unconscious bias training, but Ms Kitteridge says it is mandatory for some staff. Recently, it took a member of the public to report a bomb threat being made to 2 Christchurch mosques on the website 4chan. But Kitteridge says the NZSIS doesn't monitor the entire internet.
We are not conducting mass surveillance of New Zealanders. And we are also not focused on hate speech. Our specific area of interest and investigation is violent extremism or terrorism, where people are mobilising to violence and in a way that is ideologically driven.
Green Party's Golriz Garaman says that's really concerning.
We know that extremism grows online. We know that the particular terrorists that we're talking about in terms of the Christchurch terror attack, our nation's worst act of terror in living memory was radicalised online. So it is concerning that they're still not looking at hate speech online as a priority.
Ms Garaman says Ms Kitteridge should have stepped down following her response to the Royal Commission report, but wouldn't say if that should still happen.
Well, she seems to have made some improvements, so let's see. But I think that's a live question.
She says spy agencies do need to keep some things confidential, but there needs to be better oversight on whether they're focusing on the right types of threats. The minister in charge of the SIS, Andrew Little, defended the agency and its head, saying he has confidence in her.
And she talked at length about the difficulty about how far she goes in talking about specifics, specific threats and the specific work that they're doing, because the last thing you want to do is tip off individuals and organisations who potentially pose a threat.
After being pressed by reporters about being more open about how the agency operates, Andrew Little then took a swipe at the media.
You can't just focus on little bits that give you a media headline. You've got to look at everything. And that's the way we have a debate about security and intelligence, is not to focus on the titillation, but to actually look at everything that's going on.
He did, however, admit there is room for improvement, especially getting more information out into the public arena, as long as that doesn't compromise the work of the agencies. Mr Little says there is a need for a mature debate about their objectives and how they carry those out, as well as about what powers they should or shouldn't have and the limits New Zealanders are prepared to tolerate. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
The heavy rain over New South Wales eased today, but the flood danger remains, with thousands of people still out of their homes, roads cut off and vast areas of the state submerged. Officials are warning it will take time before the multi-million-dollar clean-up can begin. The ABC's David Sparks has this report.
In the air, on the land and out on the water, emergency crews are doing what they can to reach cut-off communities. But after the helicopters pass, it's eerily quiet alongside these floodwaters. Trees, street signs and farm sheds poke above the slow-moving surface. In low-lying residential streets, many homes have been inundated by the calm brown water.
And I really feel for those members of the community that have lost their homes. When the water really gets up, you can't fight it. You can't stop it, no matter how hard you try.
David Marshall has a polo farm on the Richmond lowlands. His farmhouse has been spared, but only just. A drone photo shows it perched on a raised mound, which now looks like a small island.
Oh, the whole property's underwater. We've got 200 acres, but we're part of, thousands of acres on the floodplain down there. And the reality is the water's come up very high. Our house is just shy of 16 metres, and I think the water got up just shy of 15 metres. So the reality is that it was, within 5, 6, 7, 8 metres of the back of the house. Thank goodness she's been built in the right spot.
Your house will be okay then, hopefully. Will you have much other damage around the farm?
Oh, we have stables, machinery sheds, hay sheds. We had the biggest hay season we've ever had. and we had a huge amount of storage for the polo ponies. We run about 50 polo ponies on the property, and that is all destroyed.
David Marshall is now staying at a friend's house. It's been an exhausting few days.
Fortunately, we were able to get our horses off the property 2 days ago, but because it's our farm, we were patrolling, and we found a bunch of cattle caught just on Triangle Lane there. They were clinging to a cattle race, and we were able to noose a few of them, lasso a few of them, and swim them over to higher ground. 9 cows we were able to pull off yesterday and put them on the mound, and we were able to pick up 7 horses that were further down on Benson Lane that were part of a mob of 70 that they couldn't catch. The last 7 we were able to swim off, which we had to swim between the lanes through the paddocks. It's really hard to get the horses over the fences because it's deep.
The rain has eased, but the floodwaters are lingering, and locals are still trying to absorb what's happened.
It's unbelievable. Just the vast amount of water. We were just at Pew's Lagoon, which is in Richmond, and it's halfway up the road, which we've never seen it that high before.
Some people are trying to make the most of the extra water.
We've just been kayaking on the lowlands. A little bit unusual. Usually it's full of cattle and turf farms, but now it's just wall-to-wall water.
Have you ever kayaked in that place before?
No.
Must have been a really weird and different perspective. You got paddling around like that in your kayak.
It was a bit weird. It was a bit, a bit surreal, I guess.
Only when the floodwaters recede will the massive clean-up begin.
And that was David Sparks reporting. Before we head off, quite a bit of feedback on managed isolation and quarantine. Anne's got in touch to say it would be interesting to know if New Zealanders who are travelling have dual passports, therefore enabling them healthcare at their destination if needed. She goes on to say, I'm shocked that those going on holiday are not paying the full rate of quarantine, if anything at all, says Anne. And on Olympians and black caps, they fall into the category of people travelling offshore to represent the country, so they could potentially go ahead in the queue for a vaccination. This person says, I think the government has made a good call on vaccination for representative sports people. Says another person. We need to stop elevating sport to be something of actual importance in this country. It's a game. No one's going to die if we miss the Olympics. People may die if they can't get back into the country or have to wait to be vaccinated. On the subject of Westpac getting a telling off from the Reserve Bank, this person says, just wondering how the Westpac liquidity era managed to continue for nearly 10 years. How is the Reserve Bank not picking this era up as the regulator? Surely with ANZ capital adequacy errors years ago, the Reserve Bank would have pulled their socks up and looked at their own inability to properly audit the capital adequacy ratios. Is this a question you can put to the Reserve Bank? I'll ask the producers about that. On immigration, another person, Ian's got in touch to say, great to hear the Deputy Head of Immigration, Stephen Vaughan, saying it will stop the widespread practice of low-paid immigrants. Taken many years to even admit that it occurs. Goes on to say that IRD did raids about 30 years ago on unregistered workers around the country, but were told to pull back over concern that they could end up chucking out too many workers. We are back tomorrow at the same time.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The COVID-19 Minister is promising that national sports teams won't push vulnerable New Zealanders out of the queue for an early COVID vaccination. Westpac has confirmed it is considering selling its New Zealand business due